Hello, everybody. As you can see, I'm not your usual host, Derek Schweitz. I am, in fact, the gamer's editor-in-chief, Stacey Henley, and I am here with two of our most noble warriors of light, Meg Pelliccio
Hello.
and Ryan Bamsey.
Hi.
Today we are talking about Dawntrail, Final Fantasy XIV Dawntrail, latest expansion to... I don't even remember what the thing is. The big meme that you're supposed to say before Final Fantasy XIV, it's the new expansion for that. I haven't played it. Both Ryan and Meg have played it. They both have some thoughts. We're going to dive into those thoughts now, starting with Meg. What do we feel? Early impressions. I know you've written up some stuff on this, a little bit of a defense of it. What's the deal with Dawntrail?
I think there's a slow start to it. Like no one's going to argue that. The first half is slow. Like it's fine. It's the storyline is what it is, and you're like, yeah, this is fun. It's just not very gripping. But I haven't finished it. But I've gone past the halfway mark, and I would say it has started getting a lot more interesting. So I'm hoping that kind of continues. But I can see why a lot of people are kind of logging in and getting started with it and being like, ugh. It's very A Realm Reborn in respect. You're kind of like, oh, not much is happening, but I like playing.
Same for you, Ryan?
Yeah, I'm not really enamored with it. I found the same thing. It started off almost frustratingly slow and just a big step down from what we've seen before. I've also reached the halfway point, and I'm now seeing it get better. It is significantly more interesting now that they've gotten past all the introduction to the new world and the new characters and such. It's kind of staggering, the difference.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's one thing that I kind of want to clarify, both for me, because I don't really know this game very well, but also for people who are watching and listening. It's pretty common for us as game journalists, woke shills as we are, to get games early, see them in a bit of a vacuum. That doesn't really happen with MMOs. Like, you guys played it early, but only because there was they call it early access, which I don't like. In no way, shape, or form is it an early access period. It was a 5-day pre-order bonus. But you guys played it a little bit early. And it seemed like during that period, because I think it only came out like yesterday for real, as we were recording this on Thursday. But it seemed like in that period when only the people who were maybe more hardcore fans were into it, that this seemed like a very, very negative reaction. And in the couple of days since it's been out, I guess I haven't seen that as much from the wider community. Is that true? And if it is, like, why do you think the people who love the game the most also seem to hate the game the most?
Now, I think it's about timing. So, by the time... I mean, there were people that completed it quite quickly, but the majority of people, Ryan and myself, we haven't completed it in that time. And so by the time, that it was still in early access, people were in that boring first half, and they were being very vocal about that. And by the time it actually launched, those same people were like, oh, I got further in it. It's not so bad.
Yeah.
And I think that's a large part of it. And maybe it's because, the people that didn't pre-order, the less hardcore maybe, just don't care as much. So they went in and they were like, this is fine. I don't think that last bit's true.
I think a lot of it has been a very vocal minority. I would say there are definitely problems, but you know how it is with gamers.
Sure.
They'd like to be vocal and loud and sometimes obnoxious about it.
A lot of the reviews have been calling it Dawntrail. That seems to be a thing that sticks. It's one of those names that is so catchy that it doesn't really matter what the eventual opinion of this expansion is. If people enjoy this in a month, it doesn't matter. This is now the Dawntrail expansion. That just seems so glued to this thing's reputation. That's going to be, I think, really hard for it to shake off.
Yeah, I think that's totally unfair because it's not boring. People are latching onto Dawntrail because it's a pun.
Yeah,
and people like puns. It's not boring. It's just not up to the same standard we're used to, or it's frustrating, or it's just a little bit there.
I agree, and I also disagree. Like, I agree, like, Ryan's put, like, spot on. It's not used to the standard that we used to, but at the same time, that standard was, like, an increasing kind of peak in the kind of series of the game, and that's why it doesn't meet that standard. Like, you know, Endwalker was so good.
Yeah.
But it was because it was, like, 10 years in the making, and it had a lot of hot people, which really helped. But, you know, like, there was a reason, you know, by the time, if you're watching like a trilogy of films, by the time the third one comes out, you're invested. That last one's normally like a banger. And, you know, when The Hobbit came along, it's not the same as The Return of the King, is it? Like, it's a new start. It's got to build again. It's got to build that momentum again. I think it's kind of normal for it to not be as good. I could be proven wrong. We'll see.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if it's just like the name, which kind of, again, like Dawntrail is stuck, and I don't know how well this will go over for you two or for Final Fantasy fans in general, but it feels like Endwalker was a little bit of an Avengers Endgame moment. Everything was building towards this. There seemed to be a lot of the like popular characters had their arcs fulfilled. I don't know if there was an Iron Man character who died, but you know, it feels like that was it. And then this is Shang-Chi and the Ten Rings. Who really cares anymore? Is it a little bit of the whole story just kind of adjusting to basically it's ended, it's finished, the whole thing finished, but it can't finish because it's an MMO and it has to keep going forever. That's the point of it. So
you know what's interesting, actually, you making the Marvel comparison is I was thinking about this. So I'm kind of sick of Marvel.
Yeah, I think it is.
But what I really enjoyed, right, was Moon Knight, because Moon Knight was kind of standalone. It was unrelated to all the other stuff. You didn't have to be up to date. You could just enjoy it for what it was. I kind of feel that Dawntrail is like that, or I did at the start. I thought, you know, you go into this, it's all brand new. You don't really need the wider context. You can just enjoy it for what it is. As it's going on, I feel like there are more throwbacks to the previous arc. So I don't know if that will still hold true, but I remember thinking like, oh, it's kind of like the Moon Knight of Final Fantasy 14. I'm enjoying the change and not having to, you know, have all this kind of heavy burden of the history of it. But yeah,
I feel it's quite similar to the Ace Attorney franchise.
Okay.
So this is our Apollo Justice. So we've got a new main character, but there's still the old characters around. It's the same world, but, you know, time has moved on. Whereas with the Ace Attorney, the first 3 games were peak, and now we're in the Apollo Justice era, where things aren't being looked upon so brilliantly. But maybe that will change in a couple of months or years, and people will look back on this and be like, oh, this is actually fine. But we're in the middle of it right now, and it's like, this doesn't feel right.
No, it feels like it's a little bit of a trend. People who've been listening to the show for a while will remember me and Eric talking about the reboot of World of Warcraft, and me not knowing what I was talking about then either. And we know that Amazon's New World is kind of soft rebooting itself with Eternum. It's a new start. I feel like this is a little bit different. Dawntrail doesn't feel like it's Final Fantasy 14 going, okay, we're starting fresh. We need anything. It's just kind of continuation of the story that had an ending and now begins again. If a new player was to come into Final Fantasy 14, would you call them Sprouts or Leaves? I give them some name. Sprouts. Yeah. If a Sprout was to start today, or like let's say in 3 or 4 weeks' time after the buzz of this one's gone, and it's just like any other time, would you tell them to start with The Realm Reborn, or would you tell them that's done, whole thing's done, start with Dawntrail, get on with what everyone's doing right now?
It's tricky. A Realm Reborn sets a lot of foundations for things that if you miss it, you won't understand a lot of what happens in every expansion since. If I wanted to be like really sort of skip A Realm Reborn, I'd say start with Heavensward, but okay. I wouldn't tell them to go straight for Dawntrail. That would be like telling people to miss out on Endgame.
Right, yeah.
And you know, it's so good you don't want them to miss it.
It's too linear a story to start anywhere else. I mean, we're still traveling now with characters who are introduced in the first cutscene in A Realm Reborn. It's kind of impossible.
Foundational.
Yeah.
And they do that thing a lot where, the doors will open and someone will walk in and you're like, oh, it's that guy that we know. And honestly, sometimes it happens, and it's been so long since I've played, if I'm not up to date, that I'm like, who is
the guy
that?
from Moon Knight.
Where do I know them from? And I have to look it up, where do I know this NPC from?
Yeah, but yeah,
So they do that a lot.
the game itself does that. The game's like, we met when you were saving the world, but you might not remember me. I was the engineer who worked on the rocket.
Sometimes they ask you, and you have to choose from
do you remember?
oh God, who are they? When did I meet them?
I do want to get on to I know we're talking a lot about comparisons. I do want to get on to kind of the meat of Dawntrail down a bit as well. But there's just, I guess, one thing that listening to you guys chat and a few other people at the game who are really into a chat about it, it seems like part of the problem is not just that Endwalker was an ending. I thought it was very, very good. The comparison to Endgame, I would say Endgame is so beloved, not because it's the end of the Avenger, because it's a great movie and people love that movie, and the same with you just said about Lord of the Rings. The reason these endings resonate, the good endings resonate, is not because they're endings, it's because they're good. Is it also a case of it's a little bit in Endwalker's shadow? It doesn't matter where the plot's going, it's just not as good.
Yeah, you can't, when two things are next to each other, you can't help but compare them.
Yeah.
I think that's a large part of the problem, and I think a lot of people are forgetting that. They think, the series peaked at Endwalker, and they're kind of holding it to the same standard, which isn't really fair. And Endwalker was so good, on every level, narratively and in terms of content. And they can't. I think in terms of mechanics and the dungeons and the trials and things like that, Dawntrail is actually very high quality. And they introduced a lot of new mechanics in Dawntrail. It's the narrative where it isn't meeting the standard, but again, it's because it's starting off afresh. It can't just jump into the gritty ofness of it all when you don't know who these people are or what the stakes are.
Yeah, I agree. The thing about Dawntrail is, in terms of gameplay, the best it's ever been. The dungeons are fantastic. The trials are amazing. The areas are some of the most beautiful areas I've seen in gaming. It with the recent graphical update, it's stunning. It's really raised the bar. Though when it comes to the narrative, and that includes things like quest design and side quest design, they are. It feels out of pace with the upgrades in all the other areas.
And as with any Final Fantasy game, narrative is the most important thing. So I think in a way that makes it seem all the more worse that it's not quite the same level.
Yeah, I think that we're kind of doing it in a little bit of we've done the past, we've done the shadow of Endwalker and all the things that come into it. I think it's probably time to move on a little bit to the present, and then we'll maybe have a look to the future. Spoiler for people who are skipping ahead on the episode. If we want to dive into kind of, I nearly called it Dawntrail, it really is catchy. If we're going to dive into the stuff that's happening with Dawntrail itself, the thing that Ryan just said there about the overall kind of world, the stuff around the world being so much of an improvement, even kind of a peak for gaming, is that one of those things that, I know you guys are really into Final Fantasy as a series, is it the kind of thing that the fandom as a whole, narrative comes first? Or did they care more about that stuff? Because I feel like in other games, I've been on this show a lot and I've talked about stories in games, and no one really cares a lot of the time. No one cares about the story in Ghost of Tsushima, which I would criticize. It looks great and it plays great. How much is that the case with Final Fantasy?
I think there'll be people. There'll be people who don't mind or don't care, skip cutscenes and such, and only care about the gameplay. But I think the people who do care will care a lot.
Yeah.
There'll be a lot of them. I would say probably a larger proportion of the fan base than usual will care about the story being told and the world being built compared to other games.
Final Fantasy 14 is such a wide community that they utilize the game in different ways. So I know people that they don't bother with the storyline at all. They just play to do, you know, like they put on plays and they build like museums and things like that. They're not necessarily putting the storyline first at all. They're using that space for and making it their own. You know, there are people who just want to do the PvP and things like that. So it really is what people make of it. But I do think a large part of the community are kind of like a lot of them are diehard Final Fantasy fans anyway. And even the ones where this is the only Final Fantasy they've played, I think a lot of people get very invested in the storyline. And so I think, you know, if they were to do like some kind of poll, narrative would come very high and probably top.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's quite standalone, isn't it? You said like people are only in Final Fantasy, but it's not. You don't get like Cloud showing up. It's its own.
I
thing.
mean, well,
okay.
They've had
They've
had Clive.
They've done like crossover events, and there are a lot of like throwbacks and things like that. So there's a lot of 9 theming in Dawntrail, and things like that. But yeah, technically you don't need to know any of that. Not really.
Okay. I know you haven't done the review yet because you want to finish the story before you do it, which obviously makes sense, especially when you say narrative is the main draw of the game. And I know we've also kind of said it's slow, but also it's pretty, I guess, is kind of where we've landed on. But what I guess would you summarize as some of the strengths? Let's go over 2 strengths and 2 weaknesses of Dawntrail specifically that you've kind of noticed in your like halfway. You said he's both about halfway through.
Yeah.
What stands out? Positive, negative?
I would say the dungeons and the trials, they are far and away some of the best that the game's ever produced. They're engaging. They're not too easy. You can take up the trials with the AI, so you can fight alongside like AI controlled versions of the characters that you're, there with, which hasn't always been possible in the past. So that's been a massive highlight for me. I think that's probably my biggest takeaway in terms of positives.
Meg, do you have a massive positive?
Yeah. Mine is very similar. It's the kind of technical side of it. So dungeons and trials, they are very, very good, but it's also taking into account like the quality of life aspects that they've put into this to fix things and just kind of make it easier for us. So, this was talked about before the game was out from the previews, but like in dungeons, when you used to die, there was like a shortcut and you would take it, but there was still a long run to the boss. It was a shortcut, sure, but you still had to run loads. And now it takes you immediately to the boss. And it's all the little things like that. They've merged how they do like the custom deliveries. They've sort of merged it with the kind of role quests as well, haven't they? Have you done any of those? And that was quite interesting. So yeah, they've started changing things up a little bit in small ways that I think make a big difference. And I do like that about it. And so yeah, from like a technical point of view, I think that it's very, very strong.
Yeah, absolutely.
If we take... It's a little bit slow, it's a little bit boring in places, as we know that's a known entity. If we put that aside, are there any other... We're gonna get to one character in a little bit, but are there any other negatives with the game? There's one character who's come up a lot in the reviews. Let's save them for a specific breakdown in a little bit. So aside from them and the general dullness...
I've got a couple, but they're only small things in my...
Well, we have took the 2 biggest things out in fairness. So that you can't mention the 2 things everyone hates about this.
This one is going to be, I think, universal for everyone. Everyone hates those annoying follow quests, and I feel like I've done 6 of them already, and I'm sick of them.
And they put 2 of them consecutively.
Yeah, now to be fair to them, going back to the positive, they've made them better. Now you can see where it's looking. Now you can see the space around them that you don't want to stand in. It's great.
Even if they're better, they still reminded me of all the times I had to do them and fail at them in Endwalker.
Yeah.
Like,
I did still fail at one because I thought it had finished because he was like, I'm going to rest. And then I was like, great, it's over. And then he turned around and looked at me, had to start over. Yeah. I was raging, yes. Hated it. So yeah, they still suck.
Okay. Very passionate about that.
Yeah.
Stealth doesn't belong in an MMORPG.
No, it doesn't.
Neither do platforming puzzles. That's
I was going to say, neither do jumping puzzles.
Oh.
Oh, don't get me started on them. But the other thing is, as beautiful as the new graphics update looks, I was complaining to Ryan about this the other day, there's like an odd couple of things where it feels like they got missed. And because everything else looks really pretty, when they're there, you notice them.
Yeah.
And is it Kona? Wuk Lamat, his coat, it's literally pixelated in places, and every time he's on screen, it's all I can see. And I'm like, this poor dude is a main character in this, and yet didn't get given the new treatment that was happening. That's more of like a pet peeve of mine, but like every time he's on screen, I'm looking at the buttons on his coat and I'm like, why can I see squares?
Yeah, it's understandable considering how many different textures there are in the game. Like, the graphical update would have been like triple the size if they'd covered everything, but it does make the sore points stick out a bit more.
I think we've waited long enough. Let's discuss Wuk Lamat. Now, I've not been following this game really at all. We have a lot of very, very talented people at the gamer who know Final Fantasy XIV very well. We also have yourselves. So I don't really need to care about Final Fantasy XIV. It takes care of itself. But I've heard this name probably about 25 times in the last week. Every single review mentions
see how much we hear it in game, because that's all you hear.
This, for people who aren't aware of what I'm talking about, the name is Wuk Lamat, who is a new character, I believe, in still going to call it Dawntrail. A new character in Dawntrail. Kind of the world's been restarted, as we've said. It's kind of a new start to this character. It's kind of probably going to be with you for a while, unless they do a Jar Jar Binks and write them out. Why do people not like Wuk Lamat? What is the deal with the Wookiee?
There are a few reasons. I think the biggest one is that she's the new main character.
Yes, I've heard you mention this a lot. You're not really the main character anymore.
No. The whole point of Dawntrail has been, okay, your story is done. You've saved this world, that world, the whole universe, twice over probably at this point. It's time for a holiday. And the impetus for this is Wuk Lamat. She wants to take part in this competition to inherit her father's throne. So, yeah, that sounds like a fun holiday. But this also is a holiday where she is the main character. And we've been through expansions like this before, haven't we? Like, in Heaven's Ward, you're not the main character. You're following Alphino and Estinian. In Stormblood, it's Lys.
Yeah, but Estinian was hot.
Estinian's hot, yeah. So this isn't new, but in Dawntrail, it's so pronounced that we are not the main character. I've had multiple cutscenes where I'm waiting for my character to like even just do a facial reaction, and he doesn't. He's completely out of it. Yeah, I would be happy with a nod at this point.
Yeah, I think what my biggest issue with her is not it's not just that she's the main character, is that she's the main character in like name and screen time, but you're still doing all the legwork. And like, don't give me like as Ryan said, like Estinian main character in Heaven's Ward, but it was very like give and take, and you know he like went a little bit evil. It was, you know, very good stuff. This is like she wants to prove herself to win the throne. You're doing all this. You're making all that stuff successful for the most part. It's you winning this stuff for her. I mean, you're not getting the credit for it. You're not getting the throne. She's getting the throne. I'm not saying the Warrior of Light should have got the throne, but like, you know, it's it just felt a bit like, you know, there were a couple of token bits where she does something to be like, I can do this. I'm proving myself. But it just felt like a lot of hand holding. You, as the Warrior of Light, you have been tasked with babysitting this woman, and it does feel like that a lot.
Yeah, and she gets to do the coolest things as well, and our characters don't shine at all, really.
I wish I could have swapped sides. I would have supported our brother instead.
Oh, absolutely.
It seemed more interesting.
Yeah, and he's also he would also be a better ruler because he's smart and isn't just all peace. You know how
That's
in
like a debate in itself.
you know how
You
in
should be
Fire
on
Emblem
other-
all the characters have like one thing.
Sure.
Yeah, Wuk Lamat is I want peace.
Right.
Whereas her brother, Kona, who is also in this competition to become the ruler, is like, I want to make people's lives better. And we're throwing ourselves behind this warrior cat.
She would fit in Kingdom Hearts with the amount she talks about like love and friendship and stuff.
It's very shonen anime.
I assume you
She would
don't
be
get a
fine.
choice, by the way.
No.
You've said
No, you don't have a choice. She would be fine as like I think as a side character, and I think no one would mind her as much then because it wouldn't be so in your face that this person's kind of vanilla and just kind of like like I love My Little Ponies and everything's amazing but you know she's the main character and I just want more depth to her, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't want her to be so one-dimensional and endlessly hopeful about everyone's great and you just need to talk to each other to solve problems because that's not how the real world works.
No.
And that's not how that world works.
No, I mean, no.
At all.
We've seen what happens. Well, probably not good to, put spoilers in this, but there's points where her actions don't lead to good.
Consequences.
No.
You mentioned Kingdom Hearts. That's obviously also a Square Enix game, and I don't like Kingdom Hearts, so I think it's very bad. but there are bits in Kingdom Hearts, in some Final Fantasy as well. But I think it's a bit more prevalent in Kingdom Hearts, where there's a character who seems very dull and seems very boring, but then suddenly there's some kind of narrative. And I was Mickey Mouse in disguise or some absolute rubbish. But there's something like that, right? So that's a thing, that's a trope that video games in general, and Square Enix especially, has done before. Is there any chance, and I am being very charitable here, but is there any chance that Wuk Lamat is kind of like this on purpose to set up for something? You mentioned Fire Emblem there as well, obviously in Three Houses. There's a lot of characters who are very naive before the time skip, and we see
and then they get a glow up.
Yeah. Not all of them. Some of them have horrible haircuts. But we see their change is more powerful after the time skip because we knew what they were like. Is there a chance that's going to happen here? Is it just a pretty dull character?
100%.
It's happened before.
Right.
Yeah. I actually think it's a given that will happen. I don't know if it's going to happen within Dawntrail like as we have it now, or whether it'll be a later patch or another expansion. But I do kind of feel like they're setting up like her character in its infancy. I think the way that she's so over the top naive, I think they're doing that. I hope they're doing that to almost like show the growth even more. Right. If that wasn't their plan, after the fan reaction, that is their plan.
Sure,
now.
Yeah.
They're not going to leave her like that. Yeah.
Yeah. The reaction to Wuk Lamat is very similar to the reaction that Lise had in Stormblood.
Oh yeah, and there's been a lot of comparisons to Stormblood.
Yeah.
That was the previous least favourite.
Yes, and what happened to Lise after Stormblood? We basically never got to see her again. So I
think Wuk Lamat is still redeemable. I think they can fix her.
I think so too. I don't want to be too negative.
For all we know, it happens in Dawntrail, and we haven't seen it yet. To be fair.
Yeah.
Just a little disclaimer.
There aren't that many quests left for us.
I know there's
It would
not.
have to be long cutscenes. Yeah.
Before we dive, I was just going to ask there about the future. Before we dive too much into it, it probably is worth stating that Wuk Lamat, I think I've got this right, American or English, but is American. Voice actor is trans. That's kind of some of the hate is directed at that, but mostly it's the character stuff. That's kind of one of those weird situations where it's mixed in. There's like legitimate complaint, just extremely unhinged rant.
Yeah,
legitimate complaint.
There's going to be horrible people, and that's going to like muddy the waters when it comes to criticism.
Yeah, it does make it difficult because, as you can imagine, the Square Enix team trying to be like, let's look at the criticism. All you have to do is go to the Steam page and like normal criticism, just horrendous transphobia. And you're just like, well, and then it does muddy it. And what are those people like? morons. Just there's morons in
It was a similar thing when Resident Evil 4, the remake, came out, and no one really liked it. I actually did quite like Ada, but Ada was pretty unpopular, and some of it was the voice actors not very good. So, but then most of it was that. But then some of it was this weird fetishization of her character as an Asian woman, how she should dress and how she should talk. And I think that's one of those things in gaming where there are just some people who are going to latch on to kind of everything. And unfortunately, sometimes they're not going to be right, but they're going to latch on to the right thing and just say it in completely the wrong way. Which is, it's weird because I don't really know how these people ever enjoy anything. Probably why they're so angry all the time.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's probably just worth pointing that out, that we are aware of that kind of context around it. Unfortunately, it doesn't make us like her anymore. But, we feel bad. But we still think she's a bad character.
Oh, yeah.
I don't. I'm in the clear. I've never played this game. You still think she's a bad character. Right.
with hope of being a better character.
Yes, redeemable. Future, we've done the past, the Endwalker coming into it. We've done the present, Dawntrail. Obviously, it's going to keep going. It is a starting point, as we've said. What I want to ask first, I guess, about the future is, I know you haven't finished the expansion, which does make this a little tricky, but in terms of the overall universe or realm or city or whatever, where do you see this expansion going? Because clearly the plan, I think everyone thinks the plan is going to be to build up and up and up like they did with Endwalker to another final point. The next one won't just be another story, it'll be a continuation. Where do you think that goes?
Yeah. I think they've actually come out and said, haven't they, Ryan, that this is like another 10-year story.
Wow.
This is another 10-year arc. So originally when I ran into it, I thought this was going to be obviously not entirely new because you've got a lot of the same characters. You're new. It's the same world, really, even though you go to a new area. And without spoiling anything, really, that there are more kind of throwbacks to some of the past events than I thought there were going to be.
Yeah.
So now, obviously, again, we haven't finished it. I'm wondering if it's actually going to tie in more to the previous arc than we thought it would.
Yeah. The thing about the previous, the previous story, the conflict is resolved, but there are still things that
Loose ends.
Yeah. So the world of Final Fantasy XIV is split into 14 different worlds, and we've only seen 3 of them before.
And I think we know for certain that 1 or 2 are gone.
Yeah. So there are definitely worlds to be explored that we know are out there. Yeah, reflections.
Yeah. Reflections to get technical.
Yeah. And it just seems obvious that that's going to be something that they explore in the future. There's also the Void storyline from the end of Endwalker. That seemed like it was setting up another expansion in the future.
Yeah. I think Endwalker was the end, obviously, as we know, of Hydaelyn and Zodiac, and that kind of the whole Ascians and Ancients and stuff. But I feel like a lot of the kind of stuff that we learned over that same period about the reflections, as much as the Ascians were involved in that, obviously that's the rest of that, as Ryan said, we haven't actually uncovered it all, and taking them out of the equation, that stuff is still there. And so I think there's going to be more familiar territory than we realise, but at the same time, as Ryan said, it's the different worlds. They can be anything, so it'll be familiar, but entirely not familiar.
They have so many directions to explore. Yeah. They can write any story they want, really, at this point.
Exciting times ahead. I'm not going to ask you to predict the story because I know you say you haven't finished Dawntrail and it's a long, long way off. But if you want to look at where Final Fantasy has come, I guess from the start to Endwalker, and then from Dawntrail to 10 years in the future, are there any, I guess, big hopes that you have or that the community has in general for the games? Not in the sense of this character comes back, or I hope Wuk Lamat gets more interesting, but you said this was kind of a new peak for the game. 10 years time, a lot more technology, a lot more chance to peak. What are some big things that are missing or that you'd like to see, or just anything that would push this game over the edge? Because in 10 years time it's going to be better, or demonstrably worse. It's going to change in some way in the next decade.
It's actually, it's going to die with Dawntrail
Yeah.
because people hate it that much. I'm joking. They're going to do a Realm reborn. No, they won't. It's difficult. Like, the problem is Final Fantasy 14 is very innovative, but by itself, without fans really doing much. They're constantly improving it and being like, let's make it so that people can play by themselves more. Now let's make it so that people who like to play together have more to do. So they're quite good at like constantly upping their own ante. So it's hard for me to decide, like, what do I enjoy the most? I like minions. They keep adding minions. I'm happy. I'm quite simple in that regard.
Universal Studios technique.
Yeah. But, like, yeah, narrative. My one big hope is that down the line, 10 years from now, the end of this arc is at least on the same level as Endwalker, if not better. That's my big hope.
And that's surely what they've got to be aiming for. They've got to be, if they know they're doing a 10-year story, they've got to be looking at Endwalker and saying, we have to be on this level.
They've got a lot to do. They need to add in more hot people. And that's the best.
But for me, I want my character to have more agency.
Sure.
I want more decisions. I want my character to feel like a character and not just a bag that somebody's carrying around with them. It's cringy, but I would love it if they introduce romance into the game. Because
that's going to be pretty highly requested.
Yeah, like as Meg has alluded to, there's a lot of hot people in this game, and it's just romance is obviously a big part of most people's lives. So it would be good if our characters, who for many people have been around with us for 10 years, could.
It'd be a series first, wouldn't it? Like, Final Fantasy's never done the romance thing. I mean, outside of the, like, storyline of itself. Like,
yeah, it's true. Yeah, like, you know,
there's never been a point where you choose who you romance, and
yeah, it's interesting.
That would be cool. That would be, that would be like a nice kind of curve.
Yeah, I'm not just saying that because I want to hold Jonathan Bay's hand.
You can have Graham.
It's one of those things as well where like the tech is going to play such a big part in that, because one of the reasons why MMOs traditionally have had an illusion of choice and not really much depth is because they're so big. It's easier to put choice in a Telltale game or even like a big BioWare RPG than it is to put it in an MMO, because you can't really account for the amount of choices that are made. But maybe that's one of the things that comes with tech. I think everyone's used to tech being a very visual upgrade. You know, things, there's more pixels, there's more ray tracing, things look shinier, things look better. But speed of the engine is a really underutilized part of the new tech. I think that would be really cool to see an MMO take advantage of. And I would say, not a big expert in MMOs, but my knowledge of them, Final Fantasy 14 seems to be the one that would take that. It seems to be one of the ones that's far more character-driven than a lot of other ones, rooted in its narrative. So, 10 years' time, I think that's probably something they're working towards anyway, trying to make your character have a bit more agency and say over the world. Right. Is there anything that I said I'm not an expert on this game, anything that I haven't mentioned about Dawntrail that people simply must know about? If so, tell them now.
Oh, Ryan, tell them not to do that side quest. I've forgotten its name. You have a news piece on that.
Yeah, something of riddles. Once a riddler, now a ruler. It's fully, like, it unlocks one quest before a massive cutscene.
I remember reading that.
And it spoils the cutscene.
The quest unlocks too early, basically. If you play it when it unlocks, it'll spoil the main story because you won't be there. But like immediately, like you would do the quest, it's like, oh, this dialogue is really weird. Why are they saying these weird things? And then you could do the main scenario. It's like, oh, that's why. Oh, I'm disappointed. I was lucky that I wasn't spoiled myself. I saw.
I didn't do it. I've been ignoring side quests because I've just been doing like the main scenario quest, and like I've been dabbling in like minor. And to be honest, a lot of side quests, I'm like, I don't want to get into it because if it is guide worthy, I don't want to guide that right now. So I've kind of ignored a lot of them, and so when I saw that, I was like, whew, bullet dodged.
The dialogue is so vague, but also so revealing. I feel so sorry for anyone who's accidentally
One
spoiled
thing you
themselves.
should say, actually, the queues really aren't bad.
Oh God, no.
They really aren't bad.
There's no like server stuff. I didn't mention that. I think it's
No.
usually a big thing in MMOs, but it's probably worth mentioning. The fact they're
And
not worth mentioning.
They obviously said they'd done a lot to make sure that the servers wouldn't be bad, but like I didn't believe it. I fully didn't believe it. And I was wrong. Like even on like proper launch day, I logged in and I had like a queue of 30, and I was like, bloody hell, which takes like no time at all.
Yeah.
The worst, in fact, it wasn't even me. People from my free company, like on early access launch day, they kind of got like errored out, and then there was a queue of 2,000, and that's the only time I've heard. Like, so it was literally when the servers went up and everyone was trying to get in. And other than that, it's been really smooth sailing.
Yeah.
I've been quite impressed with.
I've never had a queue. I've had like the fake queue that they say like, oh, there's 20 players ahead of you, but there aren't. They're just making you wait a little tiny bit so like they can load the game. Yeah, no, it is. That genuinely is why they do it.
It's a real thing MMOs do.
Yeah, it's like, oh, these 20 people don't exist. Just let me into the game already. I've never had an actual queue.
It's like we push through a wall in a single player game. The wall doesn't need to be there. It's just so they can load it.
I am on, I think, probably one of the least populated servers in the entire game. So
I'm on a busier server than. So like when we both went to log in at the same time on early access day, his queue was like significantly smaller than mine.
Yeah, I thought I'd gotten very lucky, but no, the servers are
Yeah.
healthy as anything. It's
Yeah. And I thought, oh well, they've been all right, but launch day they'll get worse. And then no, they're still fine.
Maybe it's because no one's playing. Guess what?
Brutal. People are playing because they're reading our guides.
That's
yes.
If I'm honest, I'm probably unlikely to ever play this, but from what I'd read in the reviews and then from listening to you guys today, I do feel a bit more, I guess, positive on. I'm not going to play it, but I do feel a bit more positive on the whole thing. It sounds like the criticisms are not expected, but usual for the type of game that it is, and there's a lot of hope that it can develop in the future. It's not kind of going off Endwalker and suddenly it's lost its way. It's a very kind of expected detour into, okay, now things are going to slow down. Maybe they just slow down a little bit too much.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it could have been a quicker kind of thing if they were using already established characters and areas, but then you would have the other problem of like, well, we're bored of this now. So,
Very damned if you do, damned if you don't. There's no winning, really.
There was always going to be a negative.
Yeah.
It just depended on what they did with it, and it's it's slow because they have to introduce everyone. No one likes the start of a book, do they? You're like, when does it get to the good bit? It's that.
Welcome to video games. You are damned if you do, and you are damned if you don't. Well, on that note, thank you both of you for joining me. I feel educated in the world of Final Fantasy XIV and especially Dawntrail. I hope our listeners do too. We don't have a review yet.
As a sprout, yeah.
I'm not going to join as a sprout. We don't have a review yet because they're still playing through it. But Meg's early impressions / defense of the pacing will be linked down below. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Visit us at thegamer.com. That is the gamer, no spaces.